Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Anna Curtis. I'm a current third year medicine resident. Yeah, gonna finish that up here pretty quickly. Looking to do, I didn't recently match, but I matched in December for cardiology.
Anna's gotten to do 2 matches, which is so exciting.
Seasoned veteran at the match.
All right, Lavina, you're up.
Yeah, hi guys. My name is Lavina. I'm a second year family medicine resident. I don't know what I want to do with my life, and we're slowly figuring it out.
The best way to be. Um, cool. Yeah, like I said, Rainy's probably like, literally knee deep in a cysto or something right now, so she'll come when she can. We're going to talk quickly about what Sketchy is. And since I know a bunch of you haven't used Sketchy before, feel free to ask any questions during that time or whenever really about what Sketchy is or how to use it. I'll go through some sort of highlights, and then we'll talk to our panel. We'll ask some questions. Again, feel free to throw your own questions in the chat or using the Q&A function. Wherever you put a question, we'll see it and find it and make sure to get it answered. And then we have, as Jen said, a special discount and giveaway at the end. So what is Sketchy? Sketchy is a visual learning platform, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think the TLDR here is that it's been used by more than 500,000 med students at this point. I was one of them long ago when it was a lot smaller than it is now. And people love it because it makes studying more fun and it helps you remember stuff. But ultimately, just because it really works, like it helps you improve your test scores and go where you want to go and do what you want to do. And I can speak, I guess, only for myself, but Anna and Lavina, I'm sure, have had the experience of way after you were sort of done with steps, like something happens and the sketchy sketch just pops into your mind. Being in the OR and like all of a sudden there's a sketchy image in my head. So it really is very powerful and sticky. We started out as micro and farm, and that's still how a lot of people know us, but we are pretty comprehensive at this point. We have essentially the full gamut of preclinical content, including our newest course, immunology, which is super fun and well loved. And then we have a whole clinical section as well, and has had the pleasure of looking through a lot of that material recently. And we've got some exciting stuff coming actually for clinical that you'll be hearing more about in the next couple of months. But we really do sort of cover it all from day one to match day, and then you stop caring completely. So again, we think that Sketchy helps you learn better and faster than reading stuff out of textbooks. We like to say that it saves you time so you can go do stuff like have friends and do hobbies and work out, but really it just saves you time so that you can spend more time studying. But it does make that studying time, we think, more fun. And that counts for something when you're doing studying for a lot of your time. And people do well with Sketchy. 95% of Sketchy users pass step one. That's meaningfully higher than the national average pass rate. And Sketchy users do pretty dang well on step two. And then, since over the last couple of years, Sketchy has changed a lot. And one thing we've added is these lesson quizzes. So after most lessons, we have 5 relatively short, I don't want to say easy, but sort of simple questions. They're not complex board style 2-step questions. They're sort of just, were you awake and paying attention while you're watching the lesson? They can be tricky sometimes. They get detailed, but they're not complicated, if that makes sense. And we just added 1,000 more of those. So basically every lesson at Sketchy now has this set of 5 questions after. I think they're really awesome. They're a nice way to just sort of check your knowledge and make sure that you sort of understood what the video wanted you to understand when you're done with it. So that's Sketchy in a nutshell. Yeah, I don't know, Anna, Lavina, if you have anything to add. I know, Anna, you the Linnaeus lid video. Yeah, that's
Oh, I
a-
mean, yeah, huge fan. In residency, you guys will have to take like some form of standardized exam every year. For medicine, it's ITE. I forgot what gen surge is. But like every year, I'm like answering questions based on sketchy knowledge that I haven't looked at in like since step one. It's crazy. It just kind of like lingers for a long time, which is why I really like it.
I
yeah,
said
it
that.
stays in there forever, for better or worse.
For sure.
Um, cool. So that's Sketchy. But enough about us. Let's talk about you. Um, so we've sort of broken this up into a few different sections. We'll ask questions of Anna and Lavina, and we'll go from there. Again, like I said, feel free to throw your own questions in the chat if you have sort of follow-up questions in the chat or the QA feature. All right, so let's start with boards prep, because boards are sort of a big part of your application and your match day experience. And you can be honest or comprehensive here. Like, obviously we know Sketchy is the best resource, but maybe besides that, or in addition to that, what stuff did you guys use to prep for step one and step two?
Yeah, so obviously sketchy. Huge part of my step journey. And then a question resource I think is really important. So the one we all know and are terrorized by is UWorld. So sketchy, UWorld, and then for me personally, I needed something that was repetitive and kind of seeing old information frequently. So some form of like flashcard. I think everyone knows Anki. I used Anki.
Sorry. I am a huge Anki person. I actually repeated my second year of medical school, and I owe like all of my board success to Anki and Sketchy. I think if you religiously do Anki, if you like are struggling with the concepts or you struggle with memorization, I really struggle with memorization. I still have like things from Anki that pop up in my head like this far out. Um, that UWorld. I know Boards and Beyond is a really common resource. I didn't really love that. I kind of just used UWorld and Anki. And then for step two, I pretty much only used NBME's Divine Intervention, who's great, and like all the stuff I did for my shelf exams. I studied for step two in like 2 weeks because I was on a late rotation and didn't have time to do it. So I had to know it like really fast. And I think the practice exams are also really helpful.
And just to make sure, you both took step one when it was a scored exam, right? Yeah. So yeah, the sort of emphasis may have, when back in my day, the sort of saying was 2 months for step one, 2 weeks for step two, bring a number two pencil to step three. I think that's changed a bit, just in terms of the time you're talking about. But yeah, I'm glad you said the NBME test, because I feel like whenever we talk about what study resources people like to use, they say things like Sketchy and Anki and UWorld and the stuff you're used to hearing. But I think the official practice tests kind of get undersold. They're super easy. I mean, the person who makes the test or the people who make the tests also make those tests. So I think they're a great example. And because they're consistent year to year, there's like a whole knowledge base around like, oh, this test is actually like a little harder, or this one's a little easier. So like, don't trust your scores in one direction or the other. But I
I
think
was
those
just
are
going to add one more thing. I increased my score like quite a bit for step two. And the only way I did that was going through my thought processes and like reviewing my NBME exam. So like really huge plug for those. They're really awesome, especially for step two.
yeah. Curious. So we got a question for the both of you. What Anki deck did you use, if you remember? Did you make your own card? What was your own cards? What was sort of your approach to Anki?
Yeah, I can go first. So I really wanted to be one of those people that could use a pre-made deck because I think it saves you a lot of time and it's just like all there. You just have to do it. But I could not consistently do it. So I accepted that pretty early on and I actually just made my own Anki deck based on my UWorld.
I had like a long struggle relationship with Anki where I was like, this is too much time. I'm not going to do it. And then I like finally committed to it. And for me, I feel like I would get really obsessive about the details with cards that I made on my own. I'm like, am I covering the important things? Am I covering like the right things? So I used Onking. It was like very new when I was like in MS2. It was not a thing when I was in MS1. Um, and I think like it's so comprehensive and it makes me feel good that like if you do the whole deck, you mature it, like you've gotten all the information for the most part.
Cool. Yeah. So, and then maybe for a third take, I didn't use Anki. I don't like flashcards. I found the software to be crazy making, so I didn't bother using it. And I'm sure you'll hear this. You'll keep hearing this from us, but part of the process here is figuring out sort of what works for you. And the earlier the better. How do you incorporate Sketchy in your mix?
Yeah, so initially it was pretty passively. I was doing, what was I doing? Before step one, I had I think a month of internal medicine, and every day I was just trying to watch a couple of the Sketchy Path videos, like pretty passive, like not fully paying attention. And I got through all of those before dedicated. And then during dedicated, I rewatched them at like 2.5 speed or twice the speed. And I would just watch them diligently, like try and focus, and then that's kind of it. It would kind of just stick for me after that.
Um, I always had like the printed out booklet for Sketchy Micro, because that was like the original Sketchy I started with. I think that those are really helpful because you don't need to worry about like writing while you're watching the video. It's all there. You can kind of just follow along. And then I would do Anki to memorize.
Nice. Yeah, I'm curious. Anna, in particular, you said they just kind of stuck. Did you ever find yourself going back and using the review card, or were you just like, I watched this video once, I watched it again on 2x, and like I'm good?
I was definitely watching the more challenging one topics multiple times. I don't know if because when I was watching it, Sketchy Path had just rolled out. I think it did have review cards. I don't think I used them. I think I liked the voice. The voice was just soothing during that really stressful step era. The voice, I like the voices. So, but I certain sometimes I would do a UWorld question. I would miss it like just gloriously missed it. And I would rewatch that entire video as like me reviewing that question because
Yeah.
I was, wow, I don't remember anything about like T cell, ALL, or whatever.
Um, totally. Yeah. I think it's interesting, even like when I used Sketchy, there was only micro and a little bit of farm, and like it's come a long way. But also in the review card is probably even fancier now than it was when you used it. We have the quiz questions now, so there's more to it, I think, which is great. And I don't think we get enough credit for how hard it is to make the voice remain soothing at 2x speed. That takes a lot of practice. Um, I think as we sort of talked about a little already, I think this difference is even more magnified now. But how did you think differently about step one versus step two?
Yeah, so for step two, I realized I knew that like one of my problems in step one was not doing enough questions. So I like doubled the amount of questions. I think I did UWorld twice for step two. And I think that, for me, that really paid off. I felt like I was really comfortable because at some point, I know UWorld has like a ton of questions, like it's like 3,200, but at some point they in themselves kind of just become flashcards, themselves, because it's not 3,200 individual topics. It's like 300 topics that they test over like 10 times each or whatever. That math didn't check out, but yeah, so I doubled my questions, but I still, even for step two, I was rewatching sketchies like a lot. I think by step two, I was having to rewatch all the basic micro ones again. Because by the time I got to dedicated, it had been like almost 2 years since I had even watched those. So big circle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I am in the camp that I'm so glad step one is not scored anymore because it was like the worst thing ever. Step one for me, I really struggled with it. I didn't pass like our in-school version of step the first year. So I ended up repeating MS2 as a result of that. And I really had to figure out how to study. So in terms of studying for step one, it was like a combination of studying for step one and like studying for my classes. I didn't do very well in my classes the first time around. And the second time around, I did a lot better, and that showed on step one. I think that like a lot of people are like, oh, like I won't pay attention to lecture because like it's not board material or whatever. And I think that doing well in your classes is a surefire way to ensure that you know at least the basic concepts when it comes down to step one. Because I found myself like blowing off lecture a lot and focusing on third-party resources and not even doing those all the way, and then getting to step one style questions and being really lost. Step two was a lot smoother than for me. Like I mentioned, I only studied for 2 weeks. I did all the NBME exams twice. I also redid all the shelf exams, like for the individual specialties, like OBGYN and such, because I knew I really needed to figure out, like for me, NBME was very different than UWorld style of thinking. So I wanted to train with NBME because that was like the actual test. So I tried to think through my thought process when answering questions as much as possible. And yeah, I think step two in general, you feel a lot better about your study habits by the time you get there. So it's a little smoother.
From a former, I don't know, yeah, from a former, so I was in another life, a USMLE step exam tutor. I do think it's interesting that I feel like I don't know, again, my population is my N of like 10 students, but I feel like some students are taking step two first now. And they're struggling, even though they're passing step two, they're still struggling to pass step one, which has been so I still think even though it's pass fail, which is great, I still think it can be a bear. And I think that it's interesting because I feel like students maybe have a little bit more time to do really well in step two, but step one is such a different exam that it still can just you can't sleep on it.
I think it's even harder to like pass now. I don't know about the score, but I definitely feel like from what I've heard, the test itself is a lot more difficult to pass now.
Yeah, it's not three digits. I think it's 62%. But yeah, it's interesting. It's not fun. Um, so
I think that's
I don't
the
know.
thing, like you get lured in by this, like, oh, it's a pass-fail test, but it's still like just an ordeal sitting there for 8 hours or whatever. And then it's hard. And I mean, yeah, pass rates went down the first year that it was pass-fail. So
Yeah, and
that's
it's
really,
it's kind of ironic. Some of the programs that are switching step two to be first, like completely defeats the purpose. Uh,
yeah, totally. Yeah,
anyway,
actually asked that, how are students able to take step two before step one? Um, so my understanding, and curious, I know if you have a different take, but my understanding is that from the like USMLE and BME perspective, there's no, you can take whatever you want in whatever order, but some schools have particular policies about when you can or have to take certain tests. So at some schools, that might not be an opportunity. I don't know if you know more about that.
I know at my school, the way they did it was like we had to pass the in-school version of the board exam before we were like approved to sit for the actual exam. So it would be really hard to like take the in-school stuff. I don't even know if you could take it as like an MS2 or something. I know that there are people that really commonly take step 3 during 4th year, during kind of like the lull time, and I have several friends who did that, but studying for step 2 before step 1, like I couldn't do that. Like that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think it would be tricky, but I think it also is a reflection of the way that, rightly or wrongly, the way that these exams get used and thought about by students and program directors and so on. I think we've talked about this a little. Don't blow it off. It's still a real test. I don't know if you have any final thoughts on step 1 being pass fail before we talk about some other non-test stuff.
Path, path. It's the majority of step 1. So, and that will carry over to step 2, 100%. So if you're gonna focus on one topic a lot, path is kind of the winner.
I agree with path. I also think farm is super important. I think the test is pretty much like 70% path and farm. So
Cool. All right, I'm gonna load up all these questions so we can pick and choose a little bit. But let's talk about rotations a little. I think that first question is sort of how to get the most out of clinical rotations, or I think a big part of your clinical year, whether it's your 3rd year or starting in your 2nd year or whatever crazy stuff med schools are doing these days, part of it is to let you evaluate the specialties and sort of figure out where you want to go. So, how did you think about that as you were heading into 3rd year, and were there other things that you wanted to get out of the year?
I can start if that's okay, Anna. I think 3rd year was like the reason I didn't drop out of med school. I was really struggling after repeating preclinical year and just like was really sick of being behind a desk all day and like not having any social interaction. I think the way to get the most out of clinical rotations is realizing that this is really the time that you're going to learn the foundation of like your medical skills. Yes, you learn a lot more in residency, but like I was COVID impacted my 3rd year, and my physical exam skills like left a lot to be desired when I started residency, because I didn't have that like in-person interaction on clinical rotations that is so valuable. So I know that it's really tempting to be like, I want to like leave and study, but really try to be present and asking questions to like create a strong base and foundational knowledge for both residency and 4th year.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that. Get sleep, you know, get sleep, try and relax. I think the worst part about rotations is that it's like auditioning for a year straight, and it's exhausting and it's really hard. And so sometimes, making sure you're getting sleep and taking a big breath and trying to chill out a little bit, even during the rotation, because it's really strenuous, the whole process. So.
It sure is. I do hear that sentiment, Lavina, a lot, that like 1st and 2nd year were just like miserable, and then people get to 3rd year and are like, oh right, like this is why I wanted to come do this. So it is hard and it is stressful, but I think in some ways it's also like more interesting and way better than the rest of it. um I think one thing that's really hard and that makes it so strenuous is like, how do I how do I study? How do I get my sleep? How do I think about a specialty? How do I try and find some sort of like mentor or person to guide me through all this? Like, it's a lot to do all at the same time. And I'm curious how you all thought about prioritizing studying versus the other important stuff that you had to do during that year.
I think
So, oh, go ahead.
I think personally, I failed pretty well at that one. Because it's super hard. You're working a full-time job and then you're also studying for a shelf, and then you also are like a human being outside of school. And I think that yeah, I didn't do a great job at balancing. I was one of the people like staying at Starbucks till like midnight or however the late they were open every single night, which was not good. And I don't recommend that. You should try and stay more balanced than I was. I don't have a ton of tips because I remember just how much pressure you're under, other than just like trying to cognizantly like make the decision to carve time out for yourself and to get really good at studying in environments that aren't necessarily super comfortable. So I got really good at studying in rotations, like sitting next to the residents in the loud, busy workroom. Like I realized I could, knock out 50 more questions during the day if I was just like trying to use that time. So that's it on my end. What about you, Lavina?
Yeah, I think like I agree with a lot of what you said. I think for me, like when I came to med school, everyone was like, treat med school like a job. And like I really struggled with that first and second year because I didn't go to class, I didn't have a lot of structure, and I had a job before med school. I was a teacher. So coming back into like my groove, basically, where I was like working 6 to 4, like felt a lot better than just kind of not having any structure to my day. So I feel like third year was like the best for me grade wise and everything for that reason. For me, I really agree with what Anna said, like studying on rotation. So for example, like nights, I got so much studying done. Like I would have a week of nights and I'd like get everything I needed to. I'd get it done. On OB-GYN, when I was in L&D, I was studying, like there's appropriate times to study while you're on the rotation. And I think the biggest transition to third year is realizing you're not going to have like 12 hours a day to sit down and study anymore. You have to be efficient with your studying. I personally would like chill a little bit after work for an hour or two, eat dinner, and then study for like 1 to 2 hours, and then kind of chill out before I went to bed. I think that aiming for a realistic amount of study time is like the best way to do it because you're not going to study for like 5, 6 hours after you've worked a full day. So for me, it was just like keeping up with it a little here and there and holding myself to just like an hour or two a night.
Yeah, I think the like figuring out that sort of interstitial time during the day when like, you finished your you took half an hour and finished your one note and your resident still needs like an extra 10 or 20 minutes to finish their 19 notes. Like take that time to go through some questions, do a couple of sketchy quizzes, do a review card, do some flashcards, whatever sort of your thing is. Um, it's funny, I was trying to explain this to the like non-doctors at Sketchy a couple weeks ago, and I literally pulled up my calendar from when I was this first year, and it was like giant blocks of time just called study, study, study. And then you get to third year, and it's like the whole day is just OB-GYN. Like there's nothing else. And so, yeah, you can't, and unless you want to sit at Starbucks till midnight every night, you really can't like get that long, continuous block of study time. So you got to kind of fit it in where you can. Got a question from the audience here. Communication and personality during rotations, electives, dealing with residents, attendings, nurses. How do you make the most of it, particularly for someone who's a little shy? I definitely have experience with that, but curious if you all have answers to that question.
I'm a huge extrovert, so rotations were not difficult for me in that aspect. Anna, I don't know if you have anything.
Oh, I was super quiet in all rotations, and I think I got one eval from an OB-GYN resident that said I don't remember her. That was like verbatim in my eval, which is probably fair because I was super shy, and honestly, I think that I always tried to be helpful. Even if you're super shy, I think being confident when you introduce yourself anytime you walk in a room, I think goes a long way. If it's to like the nursing team or your residents, just doing that and then, kind of making a lot of eye contact and like offering to help, things like that. I don't think you need to be super extroverted to do really, really well in medical school, but just I think those two big things. It's like introducing yourself clearly and then always like looking eager and asking if you can help.
From the perspective of a resident, I can also just tell you what I feel like makes a strong med student eval for me, like when med students work with me. And that to me, the biggest one is like doing things, or I find the med students like most helpful when they do things and I like didn't even ask them to do it. And I know that's like, how am I supposed to read your mind? But for example, if you're in rounds and you're talking about how you need to call X consultant for, you know, Y thing, like the med student can do that. And you can offer to do that. Be like, do you mind if I, like, you know, consult urology? Like, I'm happy to do that. Do you, like, I'm happy to, you know, call this patient's family, things like that. And I think that goes a long way too, because it shows that you're actively participating in part of the team.
Always be the one to consult urology. They're just so funny and nice and helpful and amazing. um, yeah, totally. I think figuring out ways to be helpful are great, especially if you're not going to be the most like extroverted person. For me, it really helped to just like get to know the patients. And one thing that I did was just, you know, I ironically kind of hate studying. And so like when I had my like little interstitial time, I would just go back and like check on the patients again, not in like a I'm gonna write a note way, but just like, hey, how's it going? Making sure everything's okay. See if you can get them another apple juice or sneak a jello from the nurse or something like that. I think you'll find also that you spend long enough with the same sort of set of people that you get comfortable with them. So that said, I do think, you know, it's hard and you got to push yourself a little bit. Uh, cool. I think we've talked about most of the rest of these in some capacity. So let's, just in the interest of time, let's move on a little bit to choosing a specialty. Yeah, I'm curious, you know, this is, for some people, they come in knowing exactly what they want to do, and it's been their dream since they were 4 years old. And for some people like me, it's like, I was like, oh, I didn't even realize there were like choices here. So how did you go about figuring that out? How did you sort of get interested in and ultimately choose your specialty?
Yeah, I can go first. I couldn't decide. I was actually anesthesia like up till 3 months before I applied. And then I actually liked urology, but then I was like, there's no way I won't have time to do like research and my like letters and things of that nature. So I picked internal medicine, applied, and then I ultimately decided to apply to cardiology because cardiology is awesome. It's actually really hard on step one. But once you get the hang of it, it's really fun. It's super cute. There's a ton of interventions. You can like nerd out in the EP lab or like do crazy stuff in the interventional cath lab. So that's why I picked that cardiology, and internal medicine.
I came into med school like gung ho wanting to do OBGYN, and I had like never really shadowed OBGYN. I just was really interested in women's health. And then I went to my OBGYN rotation and quickly realized I did not want to be a surgeon. Um, and I loved all of my rotations. So family medicine just made sense. I love the fact that I see prenatals, I see babies, I see old people, like I see everything. And a patient actually asked me the other day, she was like, how do you guys like go from room to room and just like deal with different, like really different stuff? And I think that's like what I love the most is like it's a large variety and it's very interesting to me for that reason.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think one thing that ultimately frustrated me about uh, picking urology was that it wasn't you didn't get that variety. It's like a lot of the same stuff over and over. Um, I think that forget one of you sort of I think you alluded to this, Livina. Like there's I think a big sort of category of choice that you'll make at some point, whether you know it or not, like while you're going through the relevant rotations is do I want to do something surgical slash procedural or not? And then some there are some ways to like choose not and then kind of like veer back towards it, like Anna's doing. Um, but I think that's sort of a big helpful category of stuff. Like if you don't like doing surgery, then obviously surgery, but also like OBGYN probably isn't for you. Um, and beyond that, I think, you know, you'll get a sense from the culture of the people and just sort of how you feel when you're thinking about the problems and the patients and all that, what, what you like. How about, so once you know, you've decided you want to do medicine or family medicine or urology or whatever, um, how did you think about the specific programs as you were going through the application and interview process?
So I had like a red flag on my app. Obviously, I repeated MS2. So I applied like literally everywhere. I applied, it was like overkill. I applied to 120 programs. I definitely did not need to do that. But I was really scared because I was like, I have a repeat year. My step one's not great. My step two is like okay. Like I was just really worried. And for me, I was really looking for someone or a program that like walked the talk they were talking. So like a lot of the programs would talk about like underserved communities and like having, you know, diversity and like encouraging diversity. And then like all their residents would be like white and their PD was white and like everyone was white. And they were not showing that in terms of the makeup of their residents. My program had a diverse group of residents and also like community engagement built into the curriculum, which I didn't see at any other residency. I really wanted a residency that was outpatient heavy because I don't really want to be a hospitalist. And this program was very, very outpatient heavy. We don't have like a super strong inpatient. And we spend a lot of time in clinic and we see a lot of really complicated patients. So that to me, like the community engagement and the outpatient focus were like really big for me.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I think a big thing is like if you have a general idea of what you want to do, pick a place that caters that. So for example, I knew I wanted to go to fellowship. Wasn't sure what fellowship at the time, but so I picked a internal medicine program that had like really strong fellowship match, really strong fellowship programs. I really liked a couple other programs, but they just didn't have the fellowship opportunities. So that really like persuaded how I made my rank list. Another thing that's super important is what is your life going to be outside the hospital? So there were a couple programs that I loved, but then I realized like I couldn't afford to like bring my dog with me, which could not have that. So like I literally, as shallow as this was, I did not tell my parents. I kind of made my rank list like kind of like how comfortable can me and my dog be? Like he needs a park nearby. Like that brings me a lot of happiness. So that was sort of just like some things that I wasn't super flexible on, which sounds silly, but your life like really matters outside of the hospital as well.
I have three dogs, Anna, so I like totally feel you. And it's really interesting because I went from an extremely small town to like one of the major cities in the United States with three dogs, which I said at the very beginning, like I didn't apply to NYC because I was like, I can't live there with three dogs. But I ended up in like a very large city and it is very challenging both financially and emotionally to deal with that. And I'm just going to be honest because like I feel like more people need to consider that. I think I would choose my program again, but like cost of living is huge. I do so much stuff on the side to like support myself, and I don't think you should have to do that in residency.
Press, you have time. Yeah. Um, yeah, totally. I think just to echo what you both have said, I think the program is really important, the sort of vibe that you get from the interviews. And I'm actually curious to hear from you both about virtual interviews, since I was back in the days of flying all over the country. Um, the vibe is important, the sort of sense, do they do what they say they're going to do, that kind of thing. But the outside stuff is so, so important too. Like, I ultimately picked UCLA because that's where my family is. And I knew that it's like going to be a rough, what I thought at the time was 6 years. Uh, and like, I wasn't going to make it through if I didn't have some sort of like, if someone wasn't going to cook me dinner once in a while, basically. Um, so like I traded some cost of living for like, I lived in a pretty small place, but like, I didn't care. I was at the hospital all the time anyway, but then I could like go to my parents' house and have dinner and fall asleep and like not have to worry about it. So I do think that sort of external stuff is super important. Um, yeah, curious about the interview process in particular and how you felt you got a sense of the program or how hard that was virtually.
I was the first year of the virtual interviews. So it was a wild ride. I think that it can be really hard to get the vibe over Zoom interviews, but it is still shocking how bad some programs are. Like there are some programs you'll interview at and you're like immediately no. Like you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing this on Zoom. So I still think you can still like pick out some of the like, no offense, like weirder ones. You can catch those vibes. I had residents jumping into the happy hour from a clinic room at like 10 p.m. at night. It was like 10 p.m. at their time zone. And
That's a
I was
red
like,
flag.
yeah, I was like, and in clinic, like what? So like you'll get subtle red flags over Zoom, or they just like look exhausted. Um, so yeah, I don't hate Zoom interviews. I think that it's certainly challenging. Like I went to my residency program, had never even been in the state before, had no idea what it was about. I honestly thought it was located a little bit differently in my head than when I looked at the map after I matched. I was like, oh, that's like a lot farther away than I thought it was. Um, so I think it's great because you get to like interview coast to coast without paying the coast to coast price, which is nice. But it definitely has challenges.
I really struggled with like feeling out the vibe. I definitely recommend going to all the happy hours because you'll notice the programs where residents are happy, more residents come to the happy hour. The other thing I thought was interesting, like Anna said, like I went to a happy hour once for a program that I was really interested in. And then the residents, when they thought we were like doing some activity, were talking about how they regularly broke duty hours. And I just thought that was like so inappropriate, but like told a lot about the program. So definitely the little things. It's definitely really hard to get the vibe of a program. And that's why I feel like I went off of things I was looking for in a program more so. Especially because my program is really small. It's 444. So yeah, I also agree that I liked Zoom interviews because you can apply wherever. Like I don't think I would have gotten an interview had it been in person at my current program because it's a very regional program. But yeah.
Paul is asking about any other red flags to look out for during interviews.
Just generally not being kind. You know, if they're not kind, if they can't be kind to you when they're like sitting at home on their couch relaxing, they're probably not super nice in general. So I always would note that. Yeah. I think that's about it. Eating, I don't know why, but like I had an interview like eat like a burrito the entire time, like full frame, like not even closing their mouth. So like, like I was like, I get it, but like also like you couldn't just like put down the burrito. So like little things like that where you're like, oh, maybe they like really don't care about meeting with me today. Yeah, they're
I
pretty
think
odd.
also when like the interviewer is really flustered, like I had an interview where the interviewer, like I didn't think that she like even cared about my answers. So I think like like this program that I'm currently at, I had an interview with a faculty member who is now my advisor, and he was like one of the main reasons I went to my program because he like just seemed like such a great mentor. So if you're interacting with faculty and you're like, I don't know how I feel about this, when they're interviewing you, that's probably like a good thing to think about.
Yeah.
Oh, if the residents get along. So like resident like happy hours where all the residents like are it's just silent. It's like super one, it's super awkward as the applicant, and then two, it's like you guys like don't seem like you like even know each other. I think the programs like my home program that I'm at now, like I remember joining and it was like they were all just like hitting it off, like having a great time. And so yeah, green flag.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's the extent to which it seems like the program cares about, or I should say the department cares about the residency program. I think is something that comes through in a lot of that. Like, did they dedicate time for people for their residents to like go be part of the interview day versus like they have to pop out of whatever they're actually doing to come join it? Do they have to like sneak their burrito lunch while they're interviewing you because they didn't get the dedicated time? Do they like each other because they actually get to know each other outside of the program because they have time and space to do that? Like, I think it all comes down to, is the residency program sort of a priority for the doctors there, and that will impact your experience hugely. Um, this is a gigantic question. So what's your day-to-day life like as a resident? Uh, I know that that changes a lot, from year 1 to year 3 and then in fellowship, even from day to day, but curious if you have sort of a rough thought of that.
I can go over an outpatient day because I'm sure Anna can speak really well to hospital life. So I generally get to clinic at 8, which is when I start. I usually have a medical student with me because I'm a senior now, I'm a second year. And since we are such a small program, I almost like always have a medical student. So I have 20-minute appointments. So I see about 8 patients in a half day, 16 patients in a day. I get an hour for lunch at 12 if I finish on time, which I usually do. I even finish early sometimes. Um, and yeah, so I'll do all the patient encounters in the morning, in the afternoon, and then from there I'll go home at like 5 reasonable times. So that's why I love outpatient life because it's very manageable. And like most of the rotations I have outside of like hospital medicine are pretty manageable too, because we're like in clinics rotating with like sports medicine.
Yeah, so inpatient life, I just came off like I'll just go from ICU. I just spent like 2 months in the ICU. I usually roll in sometime around 6 a.m. I have, as a third year, I have an intern working with me and then a sub-I. Honestly, like super fun. I don't know if it's like just third year vibes, but I just kind of like float around, check on patients, talk with the nursing team, talk with my fellow. The intern does all the presenting, so I'm just throwing in orders all morning, and then supervising them on like lines, central lines, paras, A lines, stuff like that, which is super fun. And then honestly, in the ICU, it's every other day call here. So I'll get there at 6 a.m. and then leave at like 9 p.m., which is pretty brutal. But it's long days taking admissions. And yeah, it's just kind of like that on repeat all day.
Sounds awesome.
It's much better. Intern year is gonna be rough
Yeah, I
everywhere.
was gonna say your intern's running around sweating.
And I'm just like
It's like,
vibing.
this is cool. This is fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Lavina, you're muted. You're muted, Lavina.
Oh, sorry. I said in contrast, like ICU is like the hardest rotation we do in our entire residency because it's like such long hours, like the 6 to 9. So I think that thinking about like what you can manage, like I am not a morning person. I do not like hospital medicine. I don't like the days in hospital medicine, and to each their own.
1,000,000%. Yeah, that's another thing I think you'll sort of get a flavor of during the third year. Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm gonna skip through these last questions so we can get to the end. Jim's gonna tell you about this
Great.
cool discount.
Yeah, hello, I'm Jen from Sketchy. So you've heard a lot about, the match process and boards, how to get there. So for those who, are still taking boards that's in your near future and you would like to get Sketchy to aid with that prep, we do have a exclusive 15% off discount code for you all. This is exclusively for new accounts and for those who may have had a paid subscription, but it expired. So if you're currently an active subscriber, unfortunately, this doesn't work for you. This code or this link will expire tomorrow at midnight. So it's definitely very limited time. I'll drop the link in the chat as well, so it's easily accessible. It's also going to be a part of the follow-up email with the link to recording and sort of the giveaway winner as well. But just wanted to flag that for those who are interested. And then we got that last exciting giveaway.
You gonna do your
So
magical random number generator?
yes, so how we're gonna do this is I have the list of you all who answered the intro poll, and it's numbered based off of when you submitted it. So there's 42 of you guys. I will take over the screen share, which essentially is a Google's little nifty random number generator. And I'm going to generate a number, and whoever is, that user on my CSV file, you will be the winner of our 6-month Sketchy Medical subscription. So 19. All right, let's open that up. Roma Desai. If you are here, give us a shout in the chat. We want to make sure you stayed with us till the end. Open up the chat here. Nice. Oh, that worked. The last webinar we were at, we had to go through like 3 people. So congratulations, Roma. I will be in contact with you. I have your email address. And we do have 2 minutes left. Ben, if you want to ask a last, question for that last slide there for 2 residents. Or
We have
anything else, any last
Yeah, we
words?
have one in the Q&A here. How did you deal with attendings or residents who are not patient during rotations? Not that residents would ever be impatient, but maybe sometimes attendings are.
Just letting it slide, like doing your best, trying to take their constructive feedback, trying to do better. But like at the end of the day, there's just like there is an unavoidable subjective nature of like clinical rotations, and you're not going to mesh well with everybody. And some people are going to be impatient and grumpy. And I think doing your best, but then also like knowing that they might just be like an unpleasable person.
That was like a perfect answer. I don't think I have anything to add.
I had my first day of surgery and I thought I wanted to do surgery. So this is like a big rotation for me. And I had that resident who was like, every single thing I did it wrong. Like I had to put in the catheter before surgery and she was like, why are you putting on the gloves like that? I was like, I don't know, I've never done it before. How am I supposed to do it? Everything was like, she was like, what antibiotics do you want to give this patient? It's like, cefalexin. And she was like, why is that a question? Like, just say it. And like every single thing I did was the wrong way to do something. But I think like I just kept trying. I just kept going. And by the end of the rotation, she was like a big advocate for me. And I think like wrote me a nice sort of review for the rotation. So sometimes you just gotta like just take it and keep going. I think that's the only way. Completely necessary for step 2. I assume this means, is Sketchy completely necessary for step 2? And the answer is obviously yes.
Yeah, watch the sepsis internal medicine videos before you start wards or EM. High
Yes.
yield. It's everywhere.
So high yield.
I remember
So,
that.
all right.
It really razzle dazzled the residents day 1, me knowing what sepsis was.
Yes. Nice. All right, y'all. Thanks for talking through your experiences. Much appreciated. I assume Rainey's still got a camera in someone's bladder right now.
Probably lasering a stone.
Yeah, yeah. Probably my nightmare. I appreciate everyone coming. Good luck. Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye all.